It was 5:30 in the morning when everything was set to go, or almost everything. While most of the unit had their vehicles prepared, one tank company wasn't ready yet. A bridge we needed? Still being built. But we couldn't wait. By sunrise, we were moving forward with 7 tanks, and what happened next would be a fight I'd never forget. The sky was just starting to brighten when our column pushed out. Feldwebel Ulrich led the way, commanding the front tank. As the sun came up, visibility was terrible. That golden light from the east made it nearly impossible to see anything clearly. We had to move past the small town of Romaniki, then head around it to cross a shallow stream. That same creek, Russian tanks had attacked from there the day before. The moment we started crossing, everything exploded. Machine gun rounds and cannon fire rained down on us from hidden positions. I grabbed my machine gun and returned fire, but the situation was brutal. Here we were, standing out in the open with barely any cover, the sun right in our eyes, and already 2 tanks beside us were burning. My tank, a Czech-made Skoda Supersport, wasn't helping matters. The steering was acting up, making everything worse. I was lucky to get through that chaos alive. One of the other tanks broke down somewhere in the middle of all this. Hillner was commanding an H-31 model positioned right behind Feldwebel Ulrich's tank. That's when things got really bad. Ulrich suddenly found himself nearly face-to-face with a Russian Christie tank. We're talking about just 2 meters of distance. The Russian gunner fired, and his shell went straight through the opening where our machine gunner was positioned. It went right through the gunner's body. Then another Christie appeared from the right side. One of our tanks hit it, and the whole thing went up in flames. Ulrich used his cannon at point-blank range to finish off that Russian crew. The fighting distance was unbelievable, maybe 300 meters, but in this mess, it felt like everything was happening at once. I spotted another Russian tank about 300 meters away, firing at us. But how could I hit anything with our crappy Czech aiming system while looking straight into the sun? We didn't even have tracer rounds, special bullets that show where your shot is going. Without those, and without proper optics, I couldn't see where my shots were landing. I gave up on that target and focused on surviving. What happened next was total chaos. Nobody was getting clear orders from the battalion commander. The company commander, Oswald, was giving instructions to his unit, but then he forgot to turn off the radio transmitter. One after another, our tanks started catching fire. In front of me, Feldwebel Ulrich and his team were running between burning vehicles. His wild hair was falling in his face, and his blue neckerchief was hanging loose from his jacket. His driver was with him, and I can still see the expressions on their faces, scared, focused, fighting for their lives. Behind me, Oberleutnant Hillner's tank kept getting hit. Shells were exploding all around us in the dirt. Since nobody was sending orders from higher up, Hillner asked what we should do. Hauptmann Stern gave him a direct answer. The 5th Company breaks through. That order seemed crazy to Feldwebel Oswald, so he just ignored it. While I was still firing at the forest edge with my machine gun, I told Roland, my driver, to get the engine running. Sometimes the men inside a tank don't realize how dangerous things really are, which is probably good for their nerves. But I decided they needed to know the truth. This was do or die, and we'd need massive luck to avoid getting shot to pieces. All those burning tanks around me weren't exactly making me feel confident about our chances. The engine wasn't pulling right, and the steering on the left side wasn't working properly. I drove toward Leonhardt's Panzer IV, which was hiding behind a bush, then headed straight out across the muddy ground. That old machine moved through the mud like a snail, incredibly slow, incredibly vulnerable. About 500 meters away, near the forest's edge and in the shade of the trees, I saw a Russian tank. It fired into the mass of our vehicles back where we'd started. I got one useless shot off at it, less than 1% chance of hitting, but with ammunition limited, I couldn't waste more rounds on a shot like that. The other vehicles, instead of following the order to attack, started pulling back slowly. Suddenly I was completely alone in front near a narrow road. Hidden Russians were pouring machine gun fire at my turret. I used my own machine gun to silence them for a moment, but they'd already torn up all our fuel cans, tent pieces, and the rolled-up coats and blankets we had strapped to the back. It looked like the Russians had either pulled back or dropped down into their foxholes. I watched everything around me like a hawk. In my exposed position, I definitely didn't want to meet any hand grenades or bottles of burning fuel. Wilhelm Lopi realized I was in serious trouble. He and his machine gunner fired into the bushes next to me, trying to give me cover. When I looked back, I could see at least 3 burning tanks in those bushes. Another one was burning nearby, and black smoke drifted across the road like a dark cloud. Not a good feeling at all. Then Hilner called me on the radio and told us to pull back from the unseen enemy. But how was I supposed to do that with this piece of junk and 3 other men? The steering was so bad that the other tanks couldn't even move forward through that terrain. I was furious, but orders were orders. It was up to Roland and me to get this tank back to safety. Between us and the bush where Leonhardt was positioned, a huge open area lay exposed. Fire was coming from both sides. The 4.7-centimeter Russian guns were punching through our armor like we were made of paper. I let Roland climb up into the turret to look at the route ahead. We had to avoid a big water hole. If we went in there, nobody could pull us out. So we started backing up, very carefully, until we reached the bush where Leonhardt had his Panzer IV. We made it. I can't describe how relieved I felt in that moment. Once Leonhardt moved his tank, we made another jump toward the rear. As we were going, some unseen enemy fired a few shots from the left side. This was becoming serious. The old Skoda wasn't moving fast through the dirt. It was the kind of situation that made you want to cry, standing on top of the tank, waiting for the shell with your name on it. Another tank next to us got hit. Whatever was firing found its mark that time. At that moment, someone called out asking us to take some wounded soldiers. The doctor was running around with a wound in his arm from a shell fragment. I climbed out of the tank. There was Private Muller on the ground. One of his legs was completely gone, and the other was badly shot up. The doctor had already put rubber tourniquets on both legs. Miller's face had turned yellow. He wasn't going to survive being moved, but we had to try. Private Walter Bethke was also lying there. He was luckier, only one leg full of splinters. With help from Zimmerman and the driver Dreyer, I placed Miller on the engine deck of our tank. Bethke could still move, so he climbed up by himself. But then the staff surgeon jumped back into his Panzer and tried to escape. I couldn't believe it. I was furious. Where the hell was he going? He just pointed toward the rear and took off. Just then, Feldwebel Booster Jupp Wellinghoff, a classmate of mine from school, and a young private named Tishuis jumped out of their Panzer IV and dove into a drainage ditch. At that exact moment, their Panzer got hit several times. It burst into flames. The Russians switched their fire to us. It looked like a 7.62-centimeter gun was now firing shot after shot into the field around us. Jupp had severe burns on both hands and a scorched face. I could see raw flesh showing through strips of hanging skin. His left foot had been torn open by a grazing bullet. The whole boot was shredded. The young private was also wounded. My tank was still moving, the last working one we had left. I ordered Brun to find an armored half-track to evacuate the wounded. Brun left us with his machine pistol and jogged off behind our moving tank. I found out later that after catching up with the tank, my men headed back toward Bolshansk. On the way, a Russian anti-tank gun hit them, but the damage wasn't serious. Just some fuel cans on the back. It didn't hurt Bethke any worse. When Brun arrived, he made sure Bethke got to the hospital. Then he went to Hauptmann Stern and asked for some tanks to come back and help us. The answer was no, so Brun decided to come back himself to help. But when he was heading back, Hauptmann Bergstaller spotted him and immediately sent him back into the village. Bad luck. Out on the field, now covered with our burning tanks, I gave first aid to the young private. I pulled some pieces of fabric out of the wound in his hip and put on a dressing. Nobody had any more bandages, so I used a piece of string to make a tourniquet on Jupp's bleeding leg. He was losing a lot of blood. Feldwebel Bunzer was also making noise. Something was wrong with his foot. He was moaning pretty loudly, so I took a closer look. There wasn't much there, just a small wound in the flesh. I told him to stop complaining about something so minor. To distract him, I handed him my machine pistol and told him to make sure we didn't get surprised by Russian infantry. Right then, a Panzer fire nearby exploded. We got showered with pieces of metal. The 7.62mm gun was still firing. I decided we 3 needed to get moving on foot. Jupp pulled himself together, and despite his badly mangled foot, he could walk. I was amazed that little Tishuis could still move so well, even with that serious wound in his hip. Before we left, I should mention that Oberfeuergefechter Meyer from Bunzer's Panzer IV crew and Oberfeuergefechter Grothuis from the 7th Company had already gone past us. In all the chaos, I sent both of them, along with Zimmerman, toward the rear. I took Jupp under my arm, and together we hobbled toward Bolshansk. We hadn't gone far when suddenly machine gun fire came at us from the left and from the forest on our right. We threw ourselves flat and crawled forward. I had to marvel at how Jupp managed everything with those badly burned hands. that were oozing bloody water, plus that terrible foot wound. Bunzer and the young private kept up with us too. We kept crawling forward. Every time anyone raised his head, bullets whistled over us. That's how we reached a position about 400 meters in front of Bolshansk, which was still burning and smoking. Then 300 meters in front of us, on the left, I spotted several people in steel helmets, but our men didn't wear those big greatcoats. Using Bunzer's binoculars, I saw clearly they were Russians. My chest got tight. That's when I realized the terrible truth. We were cut off. We were surrounded. So what do we do now? I thought about it hard. The situation was as bad as it gets. I decided we should stay low right where we were and wait. I scanned the area with binoculars. Russians were spread out in a line blocking our route. On the right, Russian artillery was still firing. That meant that area was still German territory, at least for now. On the road behind us, columns of Russian infantry were marching. Russian tanks were rolling toward the forest. A few others were heading toward Romaniki. Now I could see the Russian tank that had fired on us earlier. We were cut off on both sides. The only hope was that the Russian positions we'd attacked the day before with my platoon and Lopez's Panzer IV were still empty. I crawled back toward a destroyed Skoda tank sitting on the road to the right. Maybe the wounded could hide underneath it. Or should we just give up? Here's the thing about being an officer. If we surrendered to the Russians, my chances of surviving were almost zero. The other men might walk away unhurt, but I wouldn't. I thought about Jep's wife back in Osnabrück. I was thinking about her at that exact moment. But no, I wouldn't surrender to the Russians, not as long as I still had bullets in my pistol. While I was crawling toward the destroyed Skoda, I saw Grotuis from the 7th Company running back. He was standing behind the burned-out tank. Then Zimmerman appeared behind him. Both still had their pistols so they could keep fighting. Grotuis's face was black from burns and smoke. I reached them and told them to move back. Bunzer was behind me and asked what he should do now. I told him to get himself together and join the others, who were now pulling back along some bushes on the field ahead. In front of us, I could see Russian infantrymen looking at the bodies of dead German soldiers. It was time to make a move. I shouted over to Bunzer and told him to cover me with his machine pistol. Zimmerman, Grotuis, and Tieshuis had gotten to a shallow ditch about 200 meters behind us. Now they were getting ready to reach the forest in front of Cholum. Were they crazy? I told them to head to the right side, the area where Russian artillery was shelling. That was a smart move because it distracted the Russians, but now they were taking fire from a Russian group that noticed us. The Russians in front took cover behind that burned-out tank and started shooting at me and Bunzer. He fired back with his machine pistol while I crawled back toward the bushes. I helped cover Bunzer as he jumped back to join me. Bunzer had emptied his first magazine. Someone else was firing from the left. We needed to move fast. Bunzer's machine pistol jammed. The magazine was stuck. The Russians were only 50 meters away now. Then the grenades came. I could see them clearly. The green, egg-shaped grenades with handles spinning through the air. They landed about 5 meters short of us. Thank God! Bunzer had jumped further back. I had to follow, moving on my belly through the shallow ditch. The bushes were just 50 meters away. That's where I needed to be. By this point, I didn't care anymore. I'd run about 10 meters when the Russians started firing like they were crazy. I felt like I was standing on a serving plate just waiting to be hit. I threw myself into the tall grass and pulled my body forward as fast as I could. I couldn't breathe. Then suddenly, a hard impact from behind, hitting my head. I pulled off my cap and touched my skull. It was hurting badly. No blood. Nothing seemed broken. But my cap had a hole in it. A bullet had gone right through it. My vision got fuzzy with red light for a moment, but then it cleared. I reached the bushes and ran as fast as I could toward another ditch on the field. The Russians on the right were getting dangerously close. Just ahead of the next ditch, I saw a few men wearing dark clothes. Thank God they were already that far ahead. But I had to think about myself right now. I just started running as fast as my legs could carry me across the rye field. The soil was sticking to my boots, making them heavy, but it didn't matter. What came next was the worst, most terrifying 1,000-meter run of my entire life. Behind me, the Russians were screaming and yelling as they fired. Something was also shooting at me from the left, but pretty soon I was putting distance between myself and them. About 300 meters now. With long strides, I was racing across the field. When I couldn't breathe anymore, I threw myself on the ground for just a second, then kept going. My pistol was in my right hand, binoculars in my left. At that moment, I didn't care about anything. All around me, bullets were smacking into the ground. Others were whistling and hissing past my head. Never mind, never mind. I had to keep going. I reached a hollow spot and threw myself down. I needed to drop some weight. I took off my coat and pulled the spare magazines out of the pockets. I shoved the maps into my trouser pockets. And I did the same thing with my calendar, notebook, and diary. I was wearing a gray pullover under everything, and I started running again. I was tempted when I saw a few horses running around in the field, but I had no idea how to handle them, and it was better to trust my own legs. I walked the next 100 to 200 meters. I had to save my energy. The Russians hadn't caught up with me, but when I walked through a field of sunflowers, the gunfire from the left got heavier. Forget it. They couldn't hit anything anyway, and I had to keep my strength up. In front of me, I could see the position that I had attacked with machine gun fire just one day before. I stared into the trees ahead and couldn't see a single Russian. The positions had been left empty. I jumped over a trench and moved toward a small stream running through the valley. A few big steps, and I was across the water. Another 100 meters, and I climbed over a fence, then disappeared into the trees. The Russians sent a few bursts of machine gun fire in my direction, but I was safe now. I went deeper into the undergrowth to avoid meeting any Russian scouts. Once I was inside the thick bushes and trees, I felt safe and protected. Those childhood days playing make-believe games in the forest back home, plus my time in the Boy Scouts, all that experience was coming in handy now. I was proud that I could move without making a sound, sneaking from bush to bush. My mind kept returning to home. Had my father ever been through something like this after the First World War? Would I make it home and get married? If I at least had a boy waiting for me at home, even just a small child, I'd feel a lot calmer right now. I also couldn't stop thinking about sports. During my military training back in Freistadt, I'd always noticed how the officers never seemed to exercise. Not a single officer in the battalion would have been able to keep up with my pace today. Soon I reached a small valley. A narrow stream ran through it, and nearby was a pasture. How peaceful everything was! On the other side, I could see colorful leaves from birch trees, walnut trees, and some pine trees scattered around. It felt like taking a nice autumn walk. Then, suddenly, my eyes filled with tears. I didn't know why. I thought about all the incredible luck I'd had over the last few days. I couldn't help myself. I put my hands together and looked above the treetops at the bright blue sky. I wasn't praying like a religious person would. I wasn't thinking about God saving my life, but I remembered something Wilhelm Lopez had told me once. He said that everyone who was fighting on our side out here had to be at peace with themselves. We had to accept that our lives might end. We could never depend on help from anyone else. Man wasn't important enough to hope for help from a higher power. The experiences out here showed us every single day how small and meaningless our lives really were. We had to be grateful just to exist at all. That knowledge should push us to do great things. Only by doing great things could we make ourselves worthy of simply being alive. I understood now how little the fear of death really mattered in moments like this, how little I actually cared about dying anymore. I didn't care. I took off my cap and looked at the long tear the bullet had made in it. If that bullet had gone just a few millimeters lower, my name would have been added to all the other officers who died in Russia. 17 officers had already been killed during this campaign. Then there was the Prince of Ratibor, who died in Poland, and Schlegel, who died in France. How small we humans really are. How little is lost when we die. At that moment, I touched my lucky charm, a medallion I wore as a talisman. When I look at it now, it gives me a feeling of strength and warmth. Everything around me and inside me had been shaken up. I couldn't wait to get back home. When I stepped out of the forest, I checked whether I could see any tanks in the village of Pastovka. If they had left, then I'd need to find Camp Grupa Rose, which was behind the forest. From the forest edge, I could see the rooftops of Pastovka and also see the Russians at Bolshansk. I needed to keep moving. I went back into the undergrowth. It was too dangerous to walk along the forest edge. Then, suddenly, I spotted a truck, a license-made Ford, sitting right inside the forest. The engine was running. I approached it carefully. The crew had to be somewhere nearby, but I didn't see a single person. Maybe there were weapons inside. On the back of the truck there was a parachute and a leather flying cap. They were German. The pilot had no chance if he'd been caught by the Russians. There was also a box with sausages and another box with cutlery. I took 5 small sausages, in case I needed food for a longer walk. I also grabbed the flying cap as a souvenir. The white silk of the parachute was tempting me too. It would make a nice wedding dress, and I could wave it when I ran into German troops. But our riflemen shot at anything that moved, so I decided not to take it. I climbed up a tree instead to look at the surroundings. Tanks were rolling up the road toward Cholum, and Russian infantry was there too. I walked for another 30 minutes and stepped out of the forest again. Now I had a view of Pastovka. Yes, there were tanks there. Men were walking and standing between the trees. They were ours. I made it. I ran into the field, waving like crazy to avoid getting shot by some trigger-happy idiot. But wait, what was that? There was a Russian lying in the field. Were they surrounded? Then I saw the tank tracks and realized the truth. These were the bodies of Russians who had been run over by one of our tank crews named Wasmuth the night before. Our men were coming toward me. Nobody could believe it. Everyone was patting my back and congratulating me. So many hands to shake. All the officers came to see me. Lopez and Theo Langenbroek among them. They'd already given me up for dead. Willem Lopez's nerves were clearly torn up. He was close to tears. I tried to make a joke to cheer him up and get him to laugh, but I failed. I couldn't hide the serious sadness in my voice when I asked him if he really thought I'd leave him alone with all those weak soldiers and hopeless men. Anyway, everything turned out okay. Roland and Brune, those loyal souls, and Muller, along with all the old friends from the signals team, they all came over to say kind words. Feldwebel Ulrich was there with his driver too. I had to tell the whole story to Major Lower, and I didn't hold back about how angry I was that no tanks had been sent back to help us. I couldn't hide how I felt about that whole disaster of an attack. He could read it all in my face. He tried to explain it by telling the young officer, the one with the Knight's Cross, and all his other commanders who were now his judges, that we had stopped the 101st Red Armored Division right here at Bolshansk. By doing that, we'd kept the road open toward the Danube bridgeheads for our troops. But I was just a regular officer. I couldn't give a real answer to someone as important as him except to congratulate him on his big success. After that, Willem Lopez and I headed to a well and washed ourselves. Then we got some food. We watched as the Russians used their Christie tanks to pull out their broken tanks and our destroyed Skodas from the field. Even the command tanks from the 5th and 7th companies, the ones with valuable radio equipment, got pulled out. Then I went to visit the wounded men. The hospital tent was quiet except for the sounds of pain and suffering. I had to see what happened to the men we'd left behind during that chaotic retreat. Walking between the beds, I could see the faces of soldiers I knew, soldiers I'd fought beside just hours before. I found Private Muller first. The medical team had done what they could with rubber tourniquets, but his condition was serious. One leg was completely gone and the other was badly damaged. His face had turned a pale yellow color. When I looked at him, I knew the truth. He wasn't going to make it. But we'd brought him here anyway. We'd done everything we could. Private Bethke was in better condition. His leg was full of shrapnel wounds, but he was stable. He'd been lucky compared to the others. The little private with the hip wound was there too, resting and recovering from what he'd been through. And then there was Jupp Wellinghoff. His hands were heavily bandaged. The burns were severe. The skin had been charred black in places. His left foot was wrapped up tight because of the grazing bullet wound that had torn through his boot and his flesh. But Jupp was strong. When he saw me, he managed to smile. That smile meant everything to me at that moment. Standing there in that tent, I thought about every decision I'd made that day, every order I'd given, every moment when I could have done something different. That's what being an officer meant. You carried the weight of everything that happened to your men. I thought about the tank commanders who didn't make it back. I thought about the crews still trapped in those burning tanks back on the field. I thought about the men who'd been standing beside me when we made our final run across that open ground with bullets flying all around us. This was the real cost of war, not the tanks or the equipment, the men. The young soldiers who came to the army as kids and would leave it changed forever, if they left it at all. Later, I had to give my report to the higher officers. They asked me what happened. They wanted to know why we'd taken so many casualties, why we'd lost so many tanks, why the retreat had been so costly. I told them everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't try to make the attack sound better than it was. I told them about the orders that came down, the orders that seemed impossible from the beginning. I told them about how we were sent to break through, how we were sent to hold positions we couldn't possibly hold, how no support came when we asked for it. Major Lower listened to my whole story. He could see the frustration in my face. He could see the anger. He could see the guilt that comes with being one of the few who made it back alive. Then he explained the bigger picture. He told me that what we'd done, what we'd sacrificed, had mattered. We had stopped the 101st Red Armored Division right here at Bolshansk. By holding them here, we'd kept the main road open. Our troops could move toward the Danube and establish bridgeheads, strategic positions, territory. But you know what? When you're the one who lost men, when you're the one who saw them burning in those tanks, statistics don't help much. Numbers don't bring people back. Understanding the larger strategy doesn't make you feel any better about the friends you're leaving behind in a hospital tent. Still, I respected Major Luhr. He'd been through his own hell in this war. The Knight's Cross he wore around his neck meant he'd done brave things, important things. A man like me, just a regular officer who'd survived one terrible day, couldn't really argue with someone like that. So instead, I told him I understood. I congratulated him on the strategic success. That's what soldiers do. We do our duty, we make our reports, and we try not to think too hard about what we've seen. After the debriefing, Willem Lopez and I walked to a well and washed ourselves. The blood and dirt came off, but the weight of the day didn't. We got some food. Nothing special. Just regular army rations, and tried to eat like normal soldiers on a normal day. We watched from a distance as the fighting continued. The Russians had control of some of their abandoned tanks and equipment. They brought up their Christie tanks to haul away the broken vehicles, both theirs and ours. Even the command tanks from the 5th and 7th companies got pulled out. Those vehicles had valuable radio equipment inside them, important communications gear. The Russians knew the value of capturing that kind of equipment. It was strange to watch your own destroyed tanks being taken by the enemy. They were going to repair them, use them against us, probably kill more German soldiers with them. That's how war works. You destroy things, and if your enemy is smart, they rebuild them and use them against you. The whole experience changed something inside me. I'd been in the military for a long time by that point, but this day was different. It wasn't just about the danger or the close calls with death. It was about understanding something deeper about myself and about life itself. I learned that the fear of death loses its power when you're actually facing it. When you're running through a field with bullets hitting the ground around you, you don't think about death. You just run, you survive, you keep going. I learned that luck matters more than most people want to admit. That bullet hole in my cap, just a few millimeters lower, and I wouldn't have come back. 17 other officers had died in Russia already. Officers I knew. Officers I'd respected. The only difference between me and them was luck, and I learned that the small things matter. The boy I might have at home someday. The wife I wanted to marry. The chance to walk in a forest without people trying to kill me. These simple things became the most important things when you realized how easily they could be taken away. I kept that lucky medallion with me. It became something more than just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of survival, a reminder of that day when everything went wrong, but I came back alive anyway. I also kept that cap with the bullet hole in it. When I looked at that hole, I could see exactly how close I'd come to joining those 17 officers in the casualty lists. It was a powerful thing to hold in your hands, proof that you'd survived when you maybe shouldn't have. Wilhelm Lopez was glad I made it back. When I saw how close he was to tears when we were reunited, I understood that the bonds we formed in war were real and deep. These men weren't just soldiers I served with, they were brothers, and brothers grieve for brothers. The next morning we had to prepare for the next operation. That's the way war worked. You fight, you survive, or you don't. And if you survive, you get ready to fight again. The Russians weren't going anywhere. They were still there, still fighting, still trying to push forward. The wounded were being cared for at the hospital. The dead were being buried or accounted for. The tanks were being repaired or replaced. The war was going to continue with or without me. But I was changed. Every soldier who goes through something like this is changed. You can't see that much death and destruction and stay the same person. You can't watch your friends burn in tanks and come out unchanged. You can't face your own death in such a close way and forget about it. What I'd learned from Wilhelm Lopez, that every man out here had to be at peace with himself, had to accept his life could end at any moment, had to understand how small and meaningless individual lives were in the face of history. That wasn't just philosophy. That was survival wisdom. That was knowledge earned through blood and fire and the screams of dying men. It drove us to accomplish great things, not because we were glory seekers or ambitious, but because if we were going to die anyway, and many of us would, we wanted to matter. We wanted our deaths to have some meaning. We wanted to be worthy of the accident of luck that had kept us alive so far. As I stood there looking at that destroyed battlefield, with Russian trucks hauling away wrecked tanks and the smell of burned metal and burned flesh still in the air, I made a decision. I was going to survive this war. I didn't know how, but I was going to make it home. I was going to marry that girl waiting for me. I was going to have that son, if God was willing. I was going to walk in peaceful forests again, not crawling through them to escape enemy fire. I was going to see my parents again and tell them I'd made it. And when this war was over, I was going to tell this story. I was going to tell people what it was really like, not the official reports or the strategic summaries, but the truth. The fear, the confusion, the horror, the unexpected moments of beauty even in the worst situations. The bonds between soldiers. The price that ordinary men paid in wars they didn't start. That bullet hole in my cap was my promise to myself. Survive. Remember, tell the truth when the shooting stops.